before we get into this incredible story, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, drop a like down below, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Because what happened when this mechanic discovered who that woman in the yellow dress really was is going to leave you speechless. Hit the notification bell and come with me, because this story is going to move you from the very first minute to the very last. Diego Alvarez had been a mechanic for more than 20 years. He lived in a small town outside of San Antonio, Texas, where the streets were quiet and the summers were brutal. His hands were thick and calloused, always stained dark with grease no matter how hard he scrubbed them at the end of the day. He was 46 years old, a single father raising his 15-year-old son, Carlos, on his own. His wife, Rosa, had passed away 3 years before from an illness that came fast and left faster, and since that day, it had been just the two of them. Diego ran a one-man operation out of a rented garage at the edge of town. The roof leaked when it rained hard. The lights flickered when the wind picked up. His tools were old and scratched, and the workbench had a crack running down the middle that he had patched with glue twice. But that garage was his. No boss, no schedule, no one telling him how to do his job. He fixed whatever people brought him, tractors, trucks, old farm equipment, anything with an engine and a problem. He was known as the guy who could solve what others could not. He just did not know yet how much that reputation was about to change everything. It was a Thursday morning in August, and the heat in San Antonio was sitting heavy on everything, the kind of heat that made the air feel thick before 7 in the morning. Diego was lying on his back underneath an old flatbed truck, working on a transmission that had given up on its owner, when his phone rang on the concrete floor beside him. He did not recognize the number, but he wiped his hand on his leg and answered anyway. A woman's voice came through, steady and direct, no greeting, no small talk. She said her name was Isabel Fuentes, and that a man named Carrillo from a farm in the next county had given her his contact. She had a tractor problem, a serious one, and she needed someone who could actually fix it. Diego slid out from under the truck and sat up. He asked what kind of machine and what kind of problem. She told him it was a large New Holland tractor, top of the line, and that it had been sitting dead for 3 days straight. She told him that 5 mechanics had already come to the farm, and not one of them had solved it. Diego frowned. 5 mechanics, and nothing resolved. That meant either the problem was deeply complicated, or 5 men had walked in overconfident and walked out the same way. He asked how far the farm was. She said about 2 hours south. He looked at the stack of unpaid invoices on his workbench. He looked at the broken garage door he had been putting off fixing for 2 months. He asked her to send him the location. He said he would be there before noon. Diego loaded his toolbox into bed of his old Ford F-150. The truck was dark blue once, but years of Texas sun had faded it to something close to gray. The air conditioning had stopped working the previous summer, and he had not had the money to fix it. The passenger window stuck halfway down and would not go all the way up, which meant highway driving filled the cab with wind noise loud enough to drown out the radio. He did not complain about any of it. That truck had started every single morning for 11 years, and in his world, that was loyalty worth respecting. He drove south on the highway with the windows open, watching the flat land stretch out on both sides. Dry grass, old fences, cattle standing still in the heat. He thought about Isabel Fuentes on the phone. The way she spoke told him something real. She was not panicked or crying. She was tired. The kind of tired that comes from trusting people repeatedly and being let down every single time. Diego knew that feeling personally. He had felt it after Rosa passed, when he realized he was raising Carlos alone and the world was not going to slow down to give him time to catch his breath. He also kept thinking about the 5 mechanics who had already tried. That number meant something. 5 men, probably all confident, probably all with their own theory about what was wrong. The more certain a mechanic was before he even touched a machine, the more likely he was to miss the thing hiding right in front of him. Diego decided before he arrived that he would look at everything before he assumed anything. The farm came into view slowly, appearing between rows of old oak trees on both sides of the road. Diego saw the entrance first, a stone arch with iron letters spelling out the name of the property, and a freshly paved lane leading in. White painted fences ran along both sides. The field behind them were green and wide, and seemed to go on longer than made sense. He had been to large farms before in his years of work, but something about this one felt different. Everything was kept up. No rusted equipment abandoned in the weeds. No broken fencing left to fall over. Someone ran this place with intention and with money. He followed the lane to a large metal barn and parked beside a black pickup truck that was new enough to still have the shine on it under a thin layer of dust. He grabbed his toolbox, stepped out into the heat, and walked toward the barn. That was when he saw her, a woman standing near the barn door with her back to him, speaking into her phone with quick, sharp words, pacing in short steps that showed she was not happy about whatever was being said to her. She was wearing a yellow dress, bright and fitted, with tall country boots and her dark hair loose over her shoulders. She moved like someone who made decisions fast and expected results faster. She ended her call, turned around, and looked at Diego the way people sometimes look at a mechanic who shows up in a beat-up truck with a worn-out toolbox, measuring quietly whether he was going to be any different from the last 5 who had failed. She introduced herself as Isabel, no last name, no handshake, all business. Diego introduced himself the same way. She walked him straight to the tractor, without any ceremony, and started talking. The machine was a New Holland T7. She said, the most expensive piece of equipment on the property, worth close to $1 million when new. It had stopped running Monday morning. The first mechanic arrived Monday afternoon, diagnosed a fuel injection pump, replaced it, and charged $3,800. The tractor still died within seconds of starting. The second mechanic came Tuesday morning, said the problem was in the electrical control system, worked on a module for several hours, and charged $2,900. Same result. The third came Tuesday afternoon, blamed the turbocharger, ordered a part, installed it, and charged $2,400. Still dead. 2 more had come and gone since then, each with a different theory, each with a bill, and each leaving the machine exactly as broken as they found it. By the time Diego arrived, Isabel had spent nearly $11,000 on repairs that had not repaired anything. She told him all of this standing still with her arms at her sides, not raising her voice, just laying out the facts the way someone does when they've already used up all their frustration and are running on something colder now. Diego listened every word. He did not offer a theory. He did not nod like he already knew the answer. When she finished, he set his toolbox on the ground and started walking slowly around the tractor. Diego walked around the machine twice before he touched anything. He crouched down and looked underneath, then stood and opened a side access panel and stared into the engine compartment without reaching in. He pressed on rubber hoses with his thumb to feel their pressure and flex. He checked clamps with his fingers, tracing wire bundles along their paths. Isabel stood back and watched. After about 30 minutes, she said that the other mechanics had at least started doing something within the first 5 minutes. Diego heard her but did not answer right away. He kept moving, slow and deliberate, like a man who had learned the hard way that the fastest path to solving a problem was taking your time at the start. He went back to his toolbox and pulled out a mechanic's stethoscope, the kind with a metal probe on the end. He pressed it to different sections of the engine block, while a young farmhand sitting in the cab ran the starter on a signal. Diego closed his eyes each time, not for show, just habit. His ears had been trained over more than 2 decades to notice the difference between a machine fighting something real and a machine being told by a computer that something was wrong. He followed a wire harness from the top of the engine down along the left side, pressing each connection as he went, and then his fingers stopped, right at the junction between the sensor wire and its connector port. The clip was not fully locked. From 3 feet away it looked fine, but up close, under his fingers, it had just barely missed the seat. One vibration away from causing exactly the kind of problem he was looking at. Diego did not make a big announcement. He did not call Isabel over to look. He reached into his toolbox for a can of electrical contact cleaner, sprayed the connector points carefully, gave it 60 seconds to dry, then pressed the 2 sides of the connector together until he felt the small mechanical click of the locking tab snapping into place. He checked the wire clamp that held the harness against the engine block and tightened it a 1/4 turn with a small screwdriver. He stood up, wiped his hands on his rag, and told the farmhand in the cab to go ahead and try starting it. The engine turned over, caught, and ran. Clean and steady and strong. Exactly the way a machine worth close to $1 million was supposed to sound. The farmhand revved it once. The engine answered without hesitation. Isabel walked over from where she had been standing and looked up at the instrument panel through the open cab door. All readings were normal. She looked at Diego. He was putting the contact cleaner back in his toolbox. She said she could not believe it. He said a loose signal wire had been giving the engine computer a false pressure reading. The computer responded the way it was programmed to, by cutting fuel to protect itself from a problem that was not actually there. Every mechanic who came before him had looked at the parts the computer was pointing at. Nobody had looked at why the computer was getting the wrong signal in the first place. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked how much she owed him. Diego thought about the number for a few seconds, honest and straightforward the way he always was. 2 hours of driving to get there, 2 hours to drive back, and about 2 hours at the farm, most of which had been looking and thinking rather than hands-on work. He said $300. Isabel looked at him the same way most people look at someone when they think they heard wrong. She asked him to say it again. He did. $300. She reminded him that the 5 men before him had charged between $2,400 and $3,800 each, and not one of them had fixed a single thing. He said that was their business, and this was his. He had reseated a connector clip. He was not going to charge her as if he had rebuilt the engine. She reached into her bag without another word, counted out $400 and held it out. She said the extra 100 was for gas and road time, and it was not negotiable. He hesitated the way honest people do, and then he took it. He picked up his toolbox and started walking to his truck. She said something before he got there. She said that in 3 years of running that farm and the others she owned, she had never once had a contractor or service provider charge her less than they thought she would pay. She said every single one of them looked at what she had and priced accordingly. He was the first person who had charged her based on what the work actually was. He stopped walking. He turned around. She was not smiling when she said it. She was just telling him something true, and he could hear it. Diego drove north with the windows down and $400 on the seat beside him. Carlos needed new shoes for the school year starting in 3 weeks. The water heater at the house had been making a grinding sound for a month. $400 did not fix all of that, but it was something real in a week that had been thin. What stayed with him longer than the money was a look on Isabel's face when the engine caught and ran. He had seen relief before, the normal kind people show when a problem is solved. This was something different. This was the look of a woman who had stopped expecting people to come through for her, and had just been surprised by one man doing exactly what he said he would do. He knew that look. He had worn it himself in the years after Rosa passed, when the world felt like it ran on other people's terms, and you just tried to keep your footing. He thought about Carlos at home, probably watching videos on his phone, and eating whatever was left in the fridge, waiting for his dad to get back. He thought about how he had almost missed the call that morning. His phone had been sitting on the floor under the truck, and he had almost let it ring out. 1 second different, and none of this would have happened. He shook his head slowly and let a small smile cross his face. You showed up. You did the work right. You charged what was fair. Sometimes that was all it took to open a door you did not even know was there. His phone rang 4 days later. It was Isabel. It was a Sunday evening, the sky going orange and pink over the rooftops of San Antonio, when Diego's phone lit up with Isabel's name. Carlos was at the kitchen table doing homework with his earbuds in, probably listening to music at the same time, the way teenagers always did. Diego stepped out to the back porch to take the call. She was not calling about a broken machine. She was calling to offer him something. She said she had been thinking since Thursday. She owned 7 farms across Texas, 63 machines total, tractors, combines, irrigation equipment, all of it. And her single biggest ongoing problem was not weather, not crop prices, not supply chains. It was maintenance. She had a small crew for basic upkeep. But every time something serious broke, she was on the phone calling outside mechanics. And every time she did that, she got overconfident men who charged too much, fixed the wrong thing, or walked away with her money and her machine still broken. She needed someone she could trust. Someone with real knowledge, real patience, and the honesty to tell her the truth about what a job cost instead of charging whatever situation would allow. She was offering him a formal position, manager of mechanical operations across all 7 properties, 2 assistants for routine maintenance, a company truck, full health coverage for him and Carlos, housing on the farm of his choosing, and a salary of $15,000 a month. Diego was standing on his back porch holding his phone, and for a long moment he did not say a single word. $15,000 a month. Diego stood still on that porch and let the number settle over him like something he needed to feel the weight of before he could respond to it. $180,000 a year. He had never earned more than $38,000 in any year of his life. Not even close. He had spent 9 years building his own shop, working alone, answering to no one, and coming up short more months than he could count. And this woman was offering him nearly 5 times what he had ever made, plus insurance for him and his son, plus a truck, plus a place to live if he needed it. He went back inside and sat across from Carlos at the kitchen table and told him everything, plain and straight, the way he had always talked to his son, even when Carlos was too young to fully understand. Carlos took out his earbuds and listened all the way through without interrupting. When Diego finished, Carlos asked one question. He asked if Diego trusted her. Diego thought about it. He thought about the way Isabel had spoken on the phone the first time, tired but direct. He thought about the way she had not flinched when the tractor started, but had stood there quietly taking it in. He thought about the $400 she had insisted on giving him, and the things she had said about contractors always charging what they thought she would pay. Then he nodded and said yes. He thought he did. Carlos said that it sounded like the answer was already there, and his dad was just taking his time catching up to it. Diego laughed for the first time in a while. Real and full, the kind that felt good. Diego spent 3 days sitting with the decision, turning it over from every angle. He wrote down the reasons to say no on one side of a piece of paper and the reasons to say yes on the other. The no side filled up fast. He was not a manager. He had never led a crew. He had spent 9 years being his own boss, setting his own hours, working in silence with no one watching. Stepping into a role that required him to coordinate people across 7 farms in multiple locations was not the same thing as crawling under a tractor alone in his rented garage. He could be good with machines and still be bad at everything else the job required. He called his old friend Ruben, who had spent years running maintenance for a large trucking company. Ruben listened without saying much and then told Diego that he was confusing 2 different things. The job was not being offered to him because he was a natural manager. It was being offered because he was the kind of person who charges $300 when he could have charged $3,000. And that kind of character was something most people never developed no matter how long they worked. He said skill could be learned, but character usually couldn't. Diego went to bed that night and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He thought about Carlos needing braces. He thought about the broken garage door. He thought about the invoices on his workbench from clients who were 60 days past due and showed no sign of paying. And then he stopped thinking about the reasons and just made the call. Diego called Isabel Monday morning and said he was accepting, but with one condition. 3 months trial period, honest and mutual. If he found the job was not right for him, he would say so and leave without drama. If she found he was not meeting what she needed, she could tell him straight and he would walk away without argument. No long contracts locking either of them into something that wasn't working. She agreed immediately. She said she respected the condition because it proved he was more interested in doing the job, well, than just collecting the salary. She told him to report to the main farm the following Monday. A company truck would be waiting, a gray Silverado, full size, 0 miles on it. He could choose which of the 7 farms to base out of, and she recommended the main property near the Laredo operation since it had the largest equipment yard. He said he would be there. That Friday, he sat down with Carlos and explained the full picture. New job, new income, possible move to the farm if it made sense after the first month. Carlos listened and then said that his dad had been working too hard for too little for too long, and that it was about time something good happened. Diego drove to the farm Sunday evening to be ready before Monday morning started. When he came through the gate and saw the gray Silverado parked clean and waiting beside the barn, something shifted inside him. Not the excitement of getting something new, more like the quiet steadiness of a man who had finally stopped doubting that he deserved something better. He got out of his old truck and breathed in the night air. He was ready. The first month was more demanding than Diego had expected, not because the mechanical work was beyond him, but because coordinating people was a different kind of skill entirely. He had 2 assistants, a young man named Marco who was eager but inexperienced, and an older hand named Tomas who knew the machines well, but had his own way of doing things that did not always line up with Diego's approach. Getting those 2 to work together, and getting both of them to trust his lead, took patience and time. He made mistakes in those early weeks. He gave unclear instructions once, and a routine oil change turned into a 4-hour job. He drove to the wrong farm property on his 3rd day because he had misread the schedule. He misjudged how long a particular repair would take and left Isabel waiting on a machine she needed for a full morning. Each time, he acknowledged the mistake plainly, figured out what went wrong, and corrected it. He did not make excuses. He did not avoid Isabel when things went sideways. He walked straight to her, told her what happened, and told her how he planned to prevent it from happening again. She noticed that. She said so on a Friday at the end of his 3rd week. She said that in her experience, the most dangerous person in any organization was not the one who made mistakes, but the one who hid them. Diego said he had learned that lesson early, back when he was a young mechanic who had made a wrong diagnosis and let a client drive away in a truck that broke down 2 hours later. He had never hidden a mistake since. By the end of the 2nd month, things had found their rhythm. Marco had grown into a solid assistant, asking better questions and making fewer assumptions. Tomas had come around once he realized Diego was not there to change everything, just to organize it. The 3 of them developed a system for preventive checks, rotating through each farm on a schedule, catching small problems before they became expensive ones. Diego started keeping a maintenance log for every machine on every property, something that had never existed before. He noted every service, every part replaced, every odd sound or warning light, every fix, and what caused the issue in the first place. Within 8 weeks, Isabel had a document she could read and understand that told her the health of every piece of equipment she owned. She had never had that before. She told Diego it was one of the most useful things anyone had ever built for her operation. He said it was just common sense, the same thing he would want if he were in her position. She said common sense was apparently not as common as people claimed. The 3rd month passed without a single machine sitting idle for more than a day. Not because nothing broke, but because the system Diego had built caught most problems early enough to fix them without stopping work. When the 3-month trial period ended, Isabel called him into the main office on the farm and sat across from him. She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a contract offer, permanent position, same salary, same benefits, and one line at the bottom he had to read twice to believe. The line at the bottom of the contract was a performance bonus structure tied to the overall reduction in maintenance costs across the 7 farms. Isabel explained it clearly. If Diego kept the machines running efficiently, if he reduced the amount spent on emergency repairs and outside mechanics, a percentage of those savings would go directly to him at the end of each quarter. She pulled out a spreadsheet and showed him the numbers from the 3 months he had already worked. Emergency repair costs were down 61% compared to the same period the previous year. Machine downtime had been cut from an average of 11 days per incident to less than 2. The amount she had previously spent calling outside contractors had dropped by more than half. She said that in 3 months, his work had already saved the operation more than she paid him in salary. The bonus structure was her way of making sure that as the operation grew, he grew with it. Diego sat with the paper in his hands and read it again. Carlos was back in San Antonio finishing the school year, staying with Diego's sister until summer. Diego was living in a small house on the main farm property, a simple place with a good kitchen and a porch that looked out over the fields. He had been sending money home every month, enough to cover Carlos and put some aside. Now she was telling him there was more coming if he kept doing what he was already doing. He signed the contract. Not with trembling hands or dramatic words, just quietly, with a steady hand, the way a man signs something he has already decided about long before the pen touches the paper. Carlos moved the farm at the start of summer break. He rode down in Diego's old blue truck, which had been retired from daily use now that the company Silverado was Diego's main vehicle. The first day Carlos spent the farm, he walked through the equipment barn with his eyes wide, stopping in front of each machine and asking his dad what it did and how it worked. Diego answered every question. He had always talked to his son that way, like the questions mattered, because they did. That evening they sat on the porch of the small house and ate tamales that Diego had made on a Sunday, and Carlos said it was strange seeing his dad look relaxed. Diego asked what he meant. Carlos said that back home in San Antonio, even when his dad was not working, he looked like he was still carrying something, like there was always a weight on him that he could not put down. Out here, he looked like he had set it down. Diego thought about that for a long time after Carlos went inside. The boy was right. Something had shifted in him over those months. He still worked hard, still took the job seriously, still lay awake some nights turning over a mechanical problem in his head. But the low-level dread that had followed him for years, the constant awareness that one bad month could unravel everything, that was gone. He was not rich. He was not living without worry entirely. But he was stable in a way he had never been before, and stability he was learning was its own kind of freedom. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, about 18 months after Diego first drove through that stone gate, that Isabel asked him to walk with her through the equipment yard. She did this sometimes, not to inspect or correct, but to think out loud with someone she trusted. She was considering expanding. 2 more farms in a neighboring county, both with existing equipment that needed full assessments before she could commit to the purchase. She wanted Diego's eyes on everything before any money changed hands. She said she had learned that the most expensive mistake in agriculture was buying land without understanding the condition of the machinery that came with it. She had made that mistake once years ago, before Diego was part of the operation. She had purchased a farm and inherited a fleet of machines that looked fine from the outside and fell apart within a season. The repair costs had eaten most of the first year's profit. She was not going to make that mistake again. She was sending Diego to assess both properties the following week. He would have full authority to report what he found, good or bad, and his report would be the deciding factor in whether she moved forward. Diego nodded and asked her a few questions about the age of the equipment and the maintenance records available. She answered what she could and said she would get him whatever documentation existed. As they walked back toward the main barn, she said something that stayed with him. She said she had learned in business that the most valuable thing you could have was one person who would always tell you the truth. He said nothing back, but he heard it. Diego spent 4 days on those 2 assessments. He drove to each property with Marco, spent 2 full days at each farm, and went through every machine with the same patience he had applied to that New Holland tractor 18 months earlier. He did not rush. He did not assume. He looked at everything, ran what could be run, checked every fluid, every fitting, every electrical connection. He documented everything in the same format he had developed for Isabel's existing fleet. Some of what he found was good. A few of the tractors were well maintained and had years of life left. Others were in worse shape than they appeared. One combine had a crack block that someone had painted over rather than repaired. Finding that took 3 hours and required removing a section of sheet metal, but it saved Isabel from inheriting a machine that would have failed spectacularly at the worst possible time. His report was 42 pages long with photographs and cost projections for every piece of equipment on both properties. Isabel read the whole thing. She called him the night she finished and said it was the most thorough pre-purchase assessment she had ever seen, done by anyone at any price. She said she had used professional agricultural appraisal firms in the past that had charged 10 times what she paid Diego and delivered a quarter of the information. Diego said he had just done what made sense. She said that was what she meant. She moved forward on one of the 2 farms and passed on the other based entirely on his report. The farm she chose turned out to be one of her most productive properties within 2 seasons. And this story is exactly the kind of content we bring to you here on Addictive Stories. Real lives changed by simple choices, simple honesty, and the willingness to do things right when nobody is forcing you to. If you are watching this and you feel like the world is not seeing what you bring to the table, keep going, keep doing the work right, keep charging what is fair, because the right person will notice. And when they do, everything can change faster than you expect. Diego had not planned any of this. He had not gone to that farm with a strategy. He had gone because he needed the work, and because Carrillo had recommended him, and because he could not afford to turn down a call. He had fixed a connector clip, charged $300, and driven home. That was all. The rest had grown from that one afternoon, the way a tree grows from something you cannot see at first, roots going deep before anything appears above the ground. He called his sister in San Antonio that evening, the one who had looked after Carlos during the school year. He told her about the assessment, about the report, about Isabel's response. His sister was quiet for a moment, and then said something their mother used to say. She said that good work always finds its way home. Diego sat on the porch of his farmhouse, looking at the fields going dark in the evening light, and let that sit with him for a while. Carlos was inside doing homework. The Silverado was parked out front. The electric bill was paid. He breathed out slow and felt the weight that used to live in his chest completely gone. 2 years passed. The operation had grown steadily. Isabel had added 2 new farms and expanded into a small cattle operation alongside the crops. Diego's team had grown from 2 assistants to 5, covering more ground and more machines than when he started. He had hired and trained each person himself, selecting not just for mechanical skill, but for the willingness to slow down and look before assuming, the same quality he had always relied on in himself. He ran weekly meetings with his team, short ones practical, covering what had been done, what was coming up, and what needed watching. He had not planned to become the kind of man who ran meetings, but he had become that man, and it fit him better than he expected. One Saturday morning, he was doing a routine inspection on one of the larger combines when Isabel came into the barn. She was not dressed for an outdoor visit. She had a folder under her arm and something in her expression that Diego had learned to read over 2 years as the look she wore when she was about to say something that mattered. She asked him to sit with her for a minute on the equipment bench along the wall. He set down his wrench and sat. She put the folder on the bench between them and opened it. Inside was a legal document, several pages, dense text, with a signature line near the bottom. He looked at the header. It said transfer of equity, partial ownership interest. He looked up at her. She said she was giving him 10% of the company, fully documented, legally binding, registered. He was going to be a partner, not an employee. Diego read the document twice, slowly. His lips moved a little on the dense sections, the way they did when he was concentrating on something he wanted to understand fully before responding. 10%. The company had expanded significantly from the $180 million revenue year Isabel had mentioned when they first met. It had grown, which meant 10% was not a small gesture. It was a real number, a life-changing number, the kind that showed up in the category of things Diego Rivera had never expected to be in. He put the papers down on the bench and looked at his hands for a moment, the rough, calloused hands of a man who had spent his adult life working with them. He told Isabel he could not accept it. He said it was too much. He said he only did his job. She cut him off, not unkindly, but firmly. She said that in 2 years, emergency repair costs across the entire operation had dropped by more than half. She said machine downtime was down by nearly 70%. She said she had not called a single outside mechanic since the week Diego joined her team. She said her equipment was running better than it had in the entire history of the farms. She said all of that was because of him, his knowledge, his patience, his honesty, and his refusal to cut corners even when no one would have noticed. She said that kind of work deserved more than a salary. She said it deserved ownership. Diego looked at the signature line. He picked up the pen she had set beside the folder, and he signed. After he signed, Isabel extended her hand across the bench. He shook it. It was the first time they had ever shaken hands. That detail stood out to him later, when he thought back on that moment. In 2 years of working together, through breakdowns and decisions and honest conversations, they had never once shaken hands. Now they were partners, and it felt like the handshake meant exactly what a handshake was supposed to mean. He called Carlos that evening. His son was 17 now, finishing his junior year, talking about studying agricultural engineering at a university in the fall. Diego told him what had happened. Carlos was quiet for a moment and then said he was proud of his dad. Not congratulations, not wow, just I am proud of you. Diego had to walk away from the phone for a second because he did not want his voice to break. He had spent 3 years being the one holding things together, being the strong one, being the dad who handled everything. Hearing his son say those words in that way hit him somewhere deep that he had not expected. He composed himself, came back to the call, and said that Carlos had been the reason he had kept going every single day, that without a reason to hold things together, he might have fallen apart after Rosa passed. Carlos said he knew. They talked for another hour about the farm, about school, about Rosa, about what she would have thought of all this. Diego said she would have laughed and told him it was about time. He laughed too, and it was real. The news of what had happened to Diego spread quietly through the circles he had always moved in: mechanics, small business owners, farmers who had known him for years in San Antonio and the surrounding counties. He did not announce it. He did not post about it. He just kept working. But people talked, and eventually people started calling him, not for repairs, but to ask him how it had happened. He always told the story the same way. He got a call. He drove 2 hours. He looked at the machine instead of assuming. He found a loose connector clip. He charged $300. He went home. He said that was all there was to the first day, and everything after came from that. People would push him for a deeper lesson, a strategy, a philosophy. He always said the same thing. He said he had charged what the work was worth, not what the situation could bear. He said there was a difference between those two things, and most people chose the second option without even realizing it. He said if you looked at someone in a hard spot and your first thought was how much you could charge them instead of how much the job was worth, something was off in your compass. And compasses that were off always led you somewhere you did not mean to go. He did not say this to sound wise. He said it because it was how he had always operated, long before Isabel, long before the farm, all the way back to the days when he was still learning from every mistake in a cold garage outside San Antonio, with Rosa bringing him coffee at 10 at night. Carlos enrolled in agricultural engineering at Texas A&M that fall. Diego drove him to campus himself in the old blue Ford, which he had held on to for reasons he could not fully explain, except that it felt wrong to let go of something that had never let him down. They unloaded boxes and bags and a second-hand desk chair into a small dormitory room, and Diego made up the bed with the sheets they had brought from home while Carlos set up his laptop. When everything was in its place, they stood in the small room together for a moment. Carlos said his dad did not have to worry. Diego said he knew. Carlos said he was going to work hard. Diego said he knew that too. They drove to a diner near campus for an early dinner, and Diego ordered the chicken fried steak, because he always did when he was in a new place. And Carlos got a burger and talked for 45 minutes about the engineering program and what he wanted to focus on. Diego listened and did not check his phone once. On the drive back to the farm, alone in the cab of the old truck with the windows cracked and the radio on low, Diego thought about Rosa. He thought about the days right after she passed, when Carlos was 12 and Diego was 43, and the whole shape of the future had shifted without warning. He thought about how scared he had been, not of losing money or failing, but of not being enough. Not enough of a father, not enough of a provider, not enough of a man to carry all of it. He drove to the gate of the farm as the sun went down and thought that maybe, in the end, enough was exactly what he had been. 3 years after that first phone call, Diego sat in the main office of the farm on a Tuesday afternoon, going over maintenance projections for the upcoming season. The operation had grown to 9 farms and more than 80 machines. His team now included 7 people, 3 full mechanics and 4 trained assistants, all of them following the system Diego had built from scratch. He had written up as an actual document, a maintenance manual specific to the operation, covering every machine type, every common failure point, every seasonal check. New team members trained on it during their first 2 weeks. Isabel had joked that Diego had turned his brain into a book and given it to the whole crew. He said that was the only way to make sure things kept running after he was gone on a day off. She said she hoped he planned to take more of those. He had taken 11 days off in 3 years, and only 2 of those had been real, where he did not check his phone every few hours. She told him that was something to work on. He said he would. He meant it, mostly. After the meeting, he walked through the equipment barn alone, running his hand lightly along the side of the big New Holland tractor as he passed it. The same model as the one he had fixed on his first day. Not the same machine. This one was newer, but close enough to make him stop for a second. He thought about that afternoon. The yellow dress, the crossed arms, the look that said she expected him to fail too. He smiled and kept walking. On a Saturday in October, Diego drove into San Antonio to visit his sister Lucia and have lunch with the family. It was a kind of gathering that happened every few weeks. Cousins and neighbors and people who had known Diego since he was young crowded around a backyard table with too much food and conversations going in three directions at once. Lucia's husband, a man named Ernesto who drove a delivery truck and had known Diego for 30 years, pulled him aside after the meal and asked him straight what had changed. He said Diego looked different than he had a few years back. Diego asked what he meant. Ernesto said that before. Diego always looked like a man who was carrying a debt he could not name. He was not sad exactly, just pressed, like the world was leaning on him from all sides. Now he looked like a man who had set something down, and was still surprised he had been able to. Diego thought about that. He said the truth was that nothing dramatic had changed. He had not won anything, or inherited anything, or gotten lucky in any big visible way. He had driven 2 hours to fix a tractor, charged what was fair, and said yes when someone good offered him something real. He said the difference between where he had been and where he was now was a phone call he had almost not answered, and $300 he could have charged as $3,000. Ernesto shook his head slowly and said that was a kind of luck that did not feel like luck at all. Diego said no. He said it felt like the beginning of something that had always been there, waiting for him to show up. Isabel came to Diego with a new idea in the spring of that third year. She wanted to formalize a maintenance operation as a separate company, a subsidiary that could eventually offer maintenance services to other farms in the region. She had been approached twice by neighboring operations asking who ran her equipment program and whether they could access the same service. She had turned them down both times because she had not been ready to share Diego's attention. But now the team was strong enough. The system was documented, and she believed Diego could oversee an expanded operation without sacrificing the quality she counted on. She asked him what he thought. He asked her several questions before offering an opinion, the way he always did. He asked about the structure, who would own the subsidiary, how contract with outside farms would be written, whether the existing team would expand or whether new hires would handle the new clients, and what the timeline looked like. She answered each one clearly. She said he would hold equity in the subsidiary as well, a separate agreement to be worked out, and that his role would shift to something between a director and a working partner. He told her he needed to think about it for a week. She said of course. He went home and called his old friend Ruben, the same one who had told him 2 years earlier that character was rarer than skill. He told Ruben what Isabel was proposing. Ruben was quiet for a moment, and then said that it sounded like the woman had decided Diego was not just an employee or even a partner, but a foundation she was building on. Diego said he thought so too. He said yes at the end of the week. The subsidiary launched quietly. No press release, no event, just a registered business name, and 3 initial contracts with neighboring farms who had heard through the agricultural community that Diego's team was the one to call. Within the first season, the new clients were reporting the same thing Isabel had experienced: fewer breakdowns, lower overall maintenance costs, machines that stayed running during the critical windows when they absolutely had to. Word spread the way it does in rural communities, slowly and thoroughly, one farmer telling another over coffee at a feed store, someone mentioning it at an equipment auction, a mechanic at another shop hearing it from a client and knowing the name. By the end of the first year of the subsidiary, Diego's team was servicing 12 operations beyond Isabel's 9 farms. He had hired 4 additional mechanics, all of them trained on his system, all of them vetted personally. He did not hire for speed or confidence or the ability to talk a good game. He hired for patience and honesty and the willingness to say, "I don't know yet," when they didn't. Those qualities were harder to find than technical skill, but they were the ones that built the kind of reputation Diego had spent 2 decades earning without knowing it. He thought sometimes about the version of himself from 4 years ago, lying under a flatbed truck in a leaking garage, answering a phone he almost ignored. He thought about that man with the patched boots and the flickering lights and the stack of unpaid invoices. He did not feel distant from that man. He felt like that man had been right about most things all along. Carlos came back to the farm the following summer for his internship, working alongside Diego's team as part of his engineering program requirements. It was strange and good at the same time. seeing his son in the equipment yard and work clothes, taking notes, asking mechanics questions, spending his evenings reviewing the maintenance manual Diego had written. Carlos had grown into a serious young man, thoughtful and precise in the way he approached problems, qualities Diego recognized from somewhere. One afternoon, they were both working on a large combine. Carlos learning the hydraulic system, while Diego walked him through the logic of how each component communicated with the others. Carlos stopped at one point and said that the way his dad explained mechanical systems was different from the way his professors did. Diego asked how. Carlos said his professors talked about how things worked. His dad talked about what things were trying to do. Diego thought about that distinction for a long time. He said he thought machines were a lot like people. They were usually trying to do the right thing, and when they failed, it was almost always because something small had stopped communicating the way it should. Carlos looked at him and said that was either a very deep observation or the most mechanical way anyone had ever described human relationships. Diego laughed and said it was probably both. That evening they ate dinner on the porch together and watched the fields go dark and did not talk much, which was its own kind of conversation between a father and a son who had made it through the hard years and come out the other side still standing, still close. And that is the kind of story we are here to tell you on Addictive Stories. The stories of people who never gave up, who did the right thing when it was easier not to, and who found that honesty, done consistently over time, has a way of building something that no shortcut ever could. Diego Alvarez did not set out to change his life on that August morning when he drove 2 hours south with a worn-out toolbox and a truck with no air conditioning. He set out to fix a tractor. He fixed it. He charged $300. He drove home. Everything else grew from that, from the quality of his attention, the fairness of his pricing, and the simple refusal to take more than what the work was worth. For years later, he was a partner in a growing agricultural operation and the founder of maintenance companies serving more than 20 farms across 2 states. His son was studying to work in the same world his father had built something in. His bills were paid, his truck was good, his team was solid, and most importantly, he slept at night without the low hum of dread that followed him through the hard years. He still drove out to check machines himself every week, still crawled underneath things when he needed to, still charged what was fair. He had not changed the thing that mattered. He had only been given more room to do it in. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And if you are the person out there doing the right thing with no one noticing yet, keep going. The right person always notices eventually.